4 painful truths about why spiritually strong people are always rejected. Carl Jung explains, have you ever felt like the more spiritually aware you become, the more isolated you feel? Like you're speaking a different language that nobody around you seems to understand? You're not alone, and more importantly, you're not crazy. Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. But what he also understood was that being authentically yourself, especially when you're spiritually awakened, comes with a price that most people aren't prepared to pay. If you've ever wondered why your spiritual journey seems to push people away, why your family doesn't understand you anymore, or why you feel like a stranger in your own life, this video will change everything. We're going to uncover 4 painful but liberating truths that Jung discovered about spiritual people and rejection. But before we begin this journey together, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Trust me, this isn't just another self-help video. This is about understanding the deepest patterns of human psychology and why spiritual evolution often leads to social isolation. First, let's understand what we mean by spiritually strong people. We're not talking about religious dogma or surface-level positivity. We're talking about individuals who have done the inner work. People who faced their shadow, questioned everything they were taught, and emerged with a deeper understanding of reality. Carl Jung spent his entire life studying why some people break free from collective thinking while others remain trapped in it. What he discovered was both fascinating and heartbreaking. The very qualities that make someone spiritually mature are often the exact qualities that society rejects. Let me share something personal with you. 3 years ago, I started my own spiritual journey. I meditated daily, read everything from ancient wisdom to modern psychology, and began questioning beliefs I'd held my entire life. What happened next shocked me. My relationships began falling apart. Friends stopped calling. Family gatherings became uncomfortable. I felt like I was speaking a foreign language. I thought I was doing something wrong. Maybe I was becoming too spiritual or pretentious. But then I discovered Jung's work and everything clicked. What I experienced wasn't a personal failure. It was a predictable pattern that Jung had mapped out decades ago. Today, we're going to explore this pattern together. Because understanding, it won't just explain your loneliness, it'll transform how you see your entire spiritual journey. Truth 1. The mirror effect. The first painful truth Jung discovered is perhaps the hardest to accept. Spiritually strong people become living mirrors, and most people are terrified of what they see in their own reflection. Jung wrote, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But here's what happens when you become spiritually aware. You stop playing the games that keep everyone else comfortable. You stop pretending. You stop living behind masks. Let me tell you about Sarah, a client who came to me completely devastated. She'd spent 2 years in therapy, working on her childhood trauma, learning to set boundaries, and developing authentic self-love. She was genuinely happier than she'd ever been. But her friends started avoiding her. At first, she couldn't understand why. She wasn't preaching to anyone. She wasn't judging anyone. She was just being herself. But that was exactly the problem. When you do your inner work, you automatically start operating from a place of authenticity. You say what you mean. You mean what you say. You don't participate in gossip. You don't fake enthusiasm for things that don't resonate with you. You become real. And Jung understood that for people who are still hiding from themselves, encountering someone who isn't hiding is incredibly threatening. You represent everything they wish they could be but are too afraid to become. Jung explained this through his concept of projection. When people look at you living authentically, they unconsciously project their own unlived potential onto you. Instead of inspiration, they feel inadequacy. Instead of admiration, they feel resentment. I remember a conversation I had with an old friend after I'd been on my spiritual path for about a year. She said something that stopped me cold. You used to be fun. Now you're always so deep. What she really meant was, you used to participate in the unconscious patterns that kept me comfortable with my own unconsciousness. This doesn't make your friends or family bad people. It makes them human. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding the very self-examination that you've chosen to embrace. When they see you living differently, it unconsciously reminds them of their own unexplored depths. Think of it this way. Most people live on the surface of the ocean, and that's where they're comfortable. When you choose to dive deep, explore the underwater caves, and discover the treasures hidden beneath the waves, you return to the surface changed. You try to share what you found, but all they see is that you're different, and different feels dangerous. Jung's solution wasn't to become shallow again. It was to understand that being a mirror for others is actually a gift, even when it's rejected. Your authenticity gives others permission to be authentic, even if they're not ready to take that permission yet. But the mirror effect is just the beginning. The second truth Jung discovered goes even deeper into why spiritual people experience rejection. Truth 2. The language barrier. The second painful truth Carl Jung uncovered is that spiritual growth literally changes how you communicate, and most people can't understand your new language. Jung wrote extensively about the collective unconscious, the shared layer of unconscious thoughts that connects all humanity. But what he also discovered was that when someone undergoes individuation, Jung's term for becoming your authentic self, they start accessing deeper layers of meaning that most people simply can't perceive. Let me share a story that perfectly illustrates this. A few months ago, I was at a dinner party, and the conversation turned to a friend's recent breakup. Everyone was taking sides, analyzing who was right and wrong, gossiping about the details. But instead of joining in, I found myself seeing the situation differently. I saw two wounded people acting out their childhood patterns, two souls who had triggered each other's deepest fears. When I gently shared this perspective, the room went silent. Someone finally said, "Why do you always have to make everything so complicated?" If you've ever had this experience, where you see layers of meaning that others miss, where you instinctively understand the deeper patterns beneath surface events, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Jung explained this through his understanding of symbols and the collective unconscious. He said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." When you awaken, you start perceiving life through symbols, patterns, and synchronicities. You see the story behind the story. Think of human communication like an iceberg. Most people operate at the tip. They discuss facts, events, and surface-level emotions. But spiritually aware people naturally dive beneath the surface. They see the unconscious motivations, the archetypal patterns, the deeper meaning. Here's how this plays out in everyday life. When someone complains about their job, most people offer practical solutions or sympathy. But you might see that they're really struggling with their relationship to authority, or working through father issues, or being called to live more authentically. When you gently point this out, they think you're being too intense or reading too much into things. When friends gossip about someone's behavior, most people join in the analysis of right and wrong. But you see the wounded child acting out, the unconscious patterns repeating, the soul's attempt to heal itself through drama. Your compassion for the villain in their story makes them uncomfortable. The loneliness of speaking a different language is profound. It's like being the only adult at a children's party. You love the children, but you can't pretend that finger. Painting is the most fascinating thing in the world. You've tasted deeper conversations and small talk leaves you feeling empty. Jung understood this isolation intimately. He wrote about feeling like a stranger in the world, unable to relate to the surface concerns that seem to consume everyone around him. But he also discovered something crucial. This linguistic isolation is actually a sign of growth. When you start speaking the language of depth, meaning, and authentic connection, you're not becoming pretentious or superior. You're becoming more fully human. Jung called this process individuation, and he understood that it naturally creates distance between you and those who haven't begun their own journey of self-discovery. Think of it like this. Imagine you're in a garden where seeds are planted at different times. Some sprout quickly and grow tall, while others remain dormant. The tall plants aren't rejecting the seeds. They've just experienced different timing in their growth. Your spiritual development doesn't make you better than others. It just means you're growing at a different pace. Jung's advice for dealing with this language barrier wasn't to dumb down your communication, but to develop what he called dual citizenship. Learn to speak both languages, the language of depth when appropriate, and the language of surface connection when that's what's needed. But speaking a different language is only part of the challenge. The third truth, Jung discovered, cuts even deeper into why spiritual people face rejection, and it has to do with the roles we're expected to play. Truth 3, the role revolution. The third painful truth Carl Jung discovered is perhaps the most liberating. Spiritually strong people naturally stop playing the unconscious, roles that keep dysfunctional systems intact. And this threatens everyone who depends on those systems. Jung spent years studying what he called family constellations and social dynamics. What he found was that every family, every friend group, every workplace operates like a complex system where everyone plays specific, often unconscious roles to maintain balance, even when that balance is toxic. Let me tell you about Marcus, a man who came to me after his spiritual awakening completely destroyed his family relationships. For 30 years, he'd been the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts, made excuses for his alcoholic father, and kept everyone happy by never expressing his own needs. But after 2 years of therapy and spiritual growth, something inside him shifted. He stopped making excuses for his father's drinking. He started setting boundaries with his emotionally manipulative mother. He refused to play the role of the family therapist who fixed everyone else's problems while ignoring his own. What happened next shocked him. His family turned against him. They didn't celebrate his growth. They attacked it. His mother accused him of being selfish. His siblings said he'd changed for the worse. His father stopped speaking to him entirely. Jung understood this dynamic perfectly. He wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But what he also discovered was that when you accept yourself completely, you automatically stop accepting the false roles that others have assigned to you. Every dysfunctional system, whether it's a family, a workplace, or a social group, requires specific people to play specific roles to maintain the dysfunction. There's always a scapegoat, a rescuer, a people pleaser, a rebel, a victim. These roles aren't chosen consciously. They're assigned by the collective unconscious of the group. But here's what happens when you become spiritually aware. You start seeing these roles for what they are: unconscious patterns that prevent genuine intimacy and authentic relationship. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. You can't unknow what you now know. I experienced this in my own family. For years, I was the responsible one, the child who never caused problems, who took care of everyone else's emotions, who sacrificed my own needs to keep peace. When I started my spiritual journey and began setting boundaries, my family was genuinely confused and hurt. They weren't being malicious. They genuinely missed the version of me that made their lives easier. But that version of me was slowly killing my soul. Jung would say that I was finally choosing individuation over belonging. And that's always a painful choice. Here are some of the most common roles that spiritual people stop playing. The emotional garbage can. You stop being the person everyone dumps their problems on without offering the same support in return. The perpetual optimist. You stop pretending everything is fine when it's not. And you stop being responsible for managing everyone else's emotional state. The invisible supporter. You stop making yourself small so others can feel big, and you start taking up the space you deserve. The conflict avoider. You stop pretending to agree with things you don't believe just to keep peace. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When you become conscious of the roles you've been playing, you realize you have a choice: continue playing them, or risk the rejection that comes with authenticity. But here's the most painful part. The people who reject you for refusing to play. These roles aren't necessarily bad people. They're often people who are trapped in their own unconscious patterns, and your growth holds up a mirror to their own unlived potential. Your mother who calls you selfish for setting boundaries isn't necessarily manipulative. She might be terrified of examining her own lack of boundaries. Your friends who say you've become too serious aren't necessarily shallow. They might be avoiding their own need for deeper meaning. Jung taught us to have compassion for the people who reject our growth, because their rejection is often a cry from their own unhealed parts. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting the mirror you've become, the possibility you represent, the path they're too afraid to walk. The key isn't to go back to playing the old roles. That would be spiritual suicide. The key is to understand that some relationships were built entirely on these unconscious role dynamics. And when you change, those relationships might not survive. And that's okay. Jung believed that true individuation requires the courage to disappoint others in service of becoming authentic. This doesn't mean being cruel or insensitive. It means being real, even when reality makes others uncomfortable. But there's one more truth Jung discovered about spiritual rejection. And this one might be the most challenging of all. Truth 4. The frequency mismatch. The fourth and final truth Carl Jung discovered is the most metaphysical and the most profound. Spiritually strong people literally operate at a different energetic frequency, and this creates an automatic sorting mechanism in relationships. Jung was fascinated by what he called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seemed to suggest an underlying order to the universe. But what he also noticed was that people at different levels of consciousness seemed to naturally attract and repel each other, almost like magnets with different polarities. Now, before you think this is just mystical nonsense, consider this. Modern quantum physics has proven that everything in the universe is essentially vibrating energy. Your thoughts, emotions, and level of consciousness all have measurable effects on your energetic output. I'll never forget the moment I understood this truth. I was at a networking event, trying to connect with people the way I used to, through small talk, surface-level pleasantries, and professional chit-chat. But something felt completely off. It was like trying to tune into a radio station that was just static. Then I met someone who, within 5 minutes, was talking about consciousness, purpose, and the deeper meaning behind their work. The conversation flowed effortlessly. We connected instantly. It was like finding my frequency after being surrounded by static all evening. Jung understood that consciousness has layers, and people naturally gravitate toward others operating at similar levels. He wrote about this in terms of psychological types and levels of individuation. But the principle is the same, like attracts like. When you do deep spiritual work, when you face your shadow, heal your wounds, and raise your consciousness, you literally change your energetic signature. You start attracting people and experiences that match your new frequency, and you naturally repel those that don't. This isn't about superiority, it's about compatibility. A classical music station doesn't reject rock music because it thinks it's better. They simply operate on different frequencies. They serve different audiences with different needs. Here's how this shows up in real life. You go to a party and feel completely drained by the gossip, superficial conversations, and drama. Energy that used to excite you now feels heavy and toxic. You find yourself naturally attracting people who are also on spiritual paths, even when you're not actively seeking them out. Old friends who used to energize you now leave you feeling exhausted, while new connections who share your values fill you with inspiration. You lose interest in activities that used to bring you pleasure, mindless entertainment, destructive habits, relationships based on mutual complaint rather than mutual growth. This frequency shift can be incredibly lonely, especially in the beginning. You're not yet connected to your new tribe, but you can no longer resonate with your old one. Jung called this the dark night of the soul, a necessary but painful period of transition. But Jung also discovered something beautiful. This temporary loneliness is actually a cocoon period. You're not being rejected by life. You're being prepared for a completely new level of connection and community. Think of it like a caterpillar entering a chrysalis. From the outside, it looks like death. the caterpillar disappears. Its old form dissolves. But what's actually happening is the most miraculous transformation in nature. The butterfly that emerges can no longer relate to the caterpillars, but it can fly with other butterflies in ways the caterpillar never imagined. Your frequency shift is actually life's way of moving you toward your true tribe, people who can meet you at your new level of depth, authenticity, and consciousness. The rejection you're experiencing isn't punishment. It's redirection. Jung's ultimate message about spiritual rejection was this: the privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. The pain of rejection is temporary, but the regret of never becoming yourself is permanent. So if you're experiencing rejection because of your spiritual growth, know this: you're not being rejected by the universe, you're being sorted by it. You're being moved toward the people and experiences that can truly see, appreciate, and celebrate who you're becoming. We've journeyed through 4 painful but liberating truths that Carl Jung discovered about spiritual people and rejection. First, you become a mirror that others fear to look into, not because you're judging them, but because your authenticity reflects their unlived potential. Second, you start speaking a language of depth and meaning that many people simply can't understand yet, and that's okay. Third, you refuse to play the unconscious roles that keep dysfunctional systems comfortable, and this threatens those who depend on those systems. And fourth, your energy frequency naturally shifts to attract your true tribe, while repelling those who no longer match your vibration. If you're going through this process right now, if you're feeling rejected, misunderstood, or lonely because of your spiritual growth, I want you to know that you're not doing anything wrong. You're doing something incredibly brave. Jung once said, "Your visions become clear when you look into your heart." Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. The rejection you're experiencing isn't a sign that you should go back to sleep. It's confirmation that you're finally waking up. If this video resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear these truths. Sometimes knowing that you're not alone in this experience is the first step toward embracing your authentic path. Subscribe for more content on psychology, spirituality, and the journey of becoming who you really are. And in the comments below, share your own experience with spiritual rejection. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Remember, the very things that make you feel rejected by some are the exact same things that will make you irresistibly attractive to your true people. Trust the process. Trust your growth. Trust yourself. Until next time, keep growing, keep glowing, and keep being authentically you.